Hi boys and girls, welcome to our story time today. Today our Mr. Men book is Mr. Uppity and it's number 11 on our list. We've done so many stories so far. Mr. Uppity. And that's what he looks like. He has a tall black hat. This is the story of Mr. Uppity. And how Mr. Uppity finishes this story not quite so uppity as at the beginning of the story. You see, Mr. Uppity was one of the rudest people in the world, if not the rudest. He was rude to anybody and everybody, so of course in Big Town, which was where he lived, he had no friends at all. Not one. Miserable old Uppity, they used to call him, and he certainly looked it. Now, as well as being very rude, Mr. Uppity was also rich. Very rich. One of the richest people in the world, if not the richest. He had the largest, longest limousine in Big Town. He had the longest garden in Big Town. He had on top of the hill in the middle of Big Town the most enormous house, the biggest house in Big Town. And there he lived, all alone, miserable old Uppity. He lived in the house all by himself. No family, no friends. One day, Mr. Uppity was walking in the gardens of his enormous house when suddenly he heard a little voice. "Hello," said the voice. Mr. Uppity looked, and there in one of his hundreds of flower beds was a goblin. "Aren't you going to say hello to me?" asked the goblin. "Go away," said Mr. Uppity rudely. "That's not very nice. He won't have friends if he tells them to go away." That goblin was being very friendly. "Oh, I know who you must be," said the goblin. "You must be Mr. Uppity, who's rude to everybody." Sniffed Mr. Uppity rudely. "Well, I know somebody who wants to meet you," said the goblin, and skipped off the way goblins do. "Come on," he called over his shoulder. Mr. Uppity's curiosity got the better of him. He followed. "In there," said the goblin, pointing at a small hole in a tree. "Don't be silly," snorted Mr. Uppity. "I wonder who wants to meet him. Maybe the postman? Maybe the milkman? Not sure. Or maybe it's one of the Mr. Men characters. Maybe it's Mr. Happy or Mr. Silly." "Oh, I'm not being silly," said the goblin. "Yes, you are," snapped Mr. Uppity. "I can't possibly get in there." "Aha!" smiled the goblin, and then he said a magic word known only to goblins, which sounded like wobbly gobbly gook or something like that. Suddenly Mr. Uppity started shrinking. He shrank and he shrank until he was exactly the same size as the goblin. "Turn me back to my proper size at once," spluttered Mr. Uppity in a rage. "Shan't," grinned the goblin. "Look how teeny he is now. Now he'll fit in the hole to see who wants to meet him." And so saying, the goblin climbed through the hole into the tree. Poor Mr. Uppity didn't know what to do, so he followed him. Inside the tree there was a staircase going down and down. Do you know where it led to? It led directly to the kingdom of goblins. That's where. Look at him trying to get in. Looks like he needs a push. Will we push him? 1, 2, 3, push! Oh, he went into the tree. Well done! "I demand to be taken immediately to whoever is in charge," said Mr. Uppity angrily. "Oh, you shall," You shall, grinned the goblin, and he led Mr. Uppity through the streets of the kingdom of the goblins until they came to a palace. Halt! Who goes there? Cried the goblin at the gate. I have brought Mr. Uppity, said the goblin. Oh! And he smiled. I think he's going to let them pass. The goblin and Mr. Uppity passed through the gates and into a courtyard and through some more gates and along a long corridor and through some large gold doors and into a huge room. There, sitting on a gold throne, was the king of the goblins. Your Majesty, announced the goblin, bowing low, may I present Mr. Uppity? Ah, said the king, so you're the fellow who goes about being rude to everybody and doesn't have any friends. Nonsense, said Mr. Uppity rudely. There's the king of the goblins. He does look like a goblin with his pointy ears. I can see that what I've heard is true, said the king, looking at the indignant Mr. Uppity. You're much too puffed up with your own importance. Therefore, he continued, I'm going to allow you to be turned back to your proper size. But when you get back to Big Town, if you're rude to anybody at all, you will immediately shrink to the size you are now. Do you understand? The goblin then took Mr. Uppity back through the kingdom of goblins and up the staircase and out of the tree at the bottom of Mr. Uppity's gardens. So now, if he's rude to somebody, he's going to shrink. He better not be rude. He'll be tiny. The goblin looked at Mr. Uppity and said something which sounded like Koogly boogly bow, or something which is probably wobbly gobbly gook said backwards, and Mr. Uppity grew and grew back to his original size. Now, you remember what the king said, warned the goblin. Don't be so uppity in future. Mr. Uppity marched off furiously to his enormous house. He's so cross. He doesn't need to be cross, he just needs to be kind and polite. The following day, Mr. Uppity was out walking through the trees of Big Town. Suddenly he came across a little boy playing with a ball. Get out of my way, snapped Mr. Uppity rudely. But as soon as he said it, you know what happened, don't you? What happened? You're right. He's after shrinking. Oh, yes. Mr. Uppity shrank and shrank until he was no bigger than the ball the boy was playing with. Oh dear, he gasped, and then he thought. I'm sorry, he said to the boy. What I meant to say was, please could I get past? Immediately, Mr. Uppity grew to his original size, and the boy moved, and Mr. Uppity went on his way. Phew. So that was when Mr. Uppity shrank. And then he decided to be polite. He said sorry, and he went back to his own size again. Then he met an old lady carrying a large shopping basket. She was late for market. Excuse me, she said to Mr. Uppity, could you tell me the time, please? No, said Mr. Uppity rudely. But as soon as he'd said it, you know what happened, don't you? He shrank. He needs to remember to be polite. Yes, Mr. Uppity shrank and shrank until he could easily fit into the old lady's basket. Oh dear, he gasped, and then he thought. I'm sorry, he said to the old lady. What I meant to say was, it's 11:25. Immediately, Mr. Uppity grew to his original size, and the old lady thanked him, and Mr. Uppity went on his way. I think he's starting to learn. Then he went and bought a newspaper from a man standing on the corner of the main street in Big Town. He was just about to walk away when suddenly he stopped and thought. He turned back to the man and said, Thank you. Wow, he's being polite. Thank you were 2 words Mr. Uppity had never used before. The man smiled. A smile was something Mr. Uppity wasn't used to getting. Ah, he's learning. That's so great. He said thank you for the first time. Then Mr. Uppity was stopped by a man who asked him if he could tell him the way to the bank. Mr. Uppity was about to say no when he thought, "Yes," he said to the man. And he told him. "Thank you," said the man. Thank you were words Mr. Uppity not only had never used before, but had never had them said to him before. Mr. Uppity smiled. He felt happy. That's really nice. Happy was a feeling Mr. Uppity wasn't used to feeling. He liked it. And you know, from that day forward to this day backward, Mr. Uppity is a changed person. He is still the richest person in Big Town, perhaps the richest person in the world, but now he has lots of friends. And he smiles a lot, and he never gets that shrinking feeling. And do you know which words Mr. Uppity uses most of all these days? I think he uses please and thank you. What do you think? The same? Let's see. Okay. Let me have a look. Please and thank you. We're right. So what we'd like to say is thank you for reading the story. And if you're ever thinking about being rude to somebody, please keep a sharp look out for goblins. The end. That was a great story read today. And now to finish off our video for today, we're going to sing a song. And it's a funny one because we're going to sing one of our Halloween songs from October. We're going back over them. So today we're going to sing 5 Little Pumpkins. And each time we sing a verse, I will add one of these, which look like a tiny pumpkin, onto this box here beside me. Okay? So you know what verse we're on. So we'll start to sing. One little pumpkin smiling, smiling. One little pumpkin smiling, smiling. One little pumpkin smiling, smiling. One little pumpkin is happy. 2 little pumpkins pouting, pouting. 2 little pumpkins pouting, pouting. 2 little pumpkins pouting, pouting. 2 little pumpkins are grumpy. 3 little pumpkins yawning, yawning. 3 little pumpkins yawning, yawning. 3 little pumpkins yawning, yawning. 3 little pumpkins are sleepy. 4 little pumpkins are crying, crying. 4 little pumpkins are crying, crying. 4 little pumpkins are crying, crying. 4 little pumpkins are sad. 5 little pumpkins are laughing, laughing. 5 little pumpkins are laughing, laughing. 5 little pumpkins are laughing, laughing. 5 little pumpkins are playing. Hooray! That was brilliant, boys and girls. I will see you tomorrow for our new story and our new song.